So I'm starting with active dry yeast. I have 8.75 gram packet here. That's about 2.5 teaspoon. So I'm going to be using the whole packet. And I'm just going to pour it in a big bowl. You want to use your package instruction to proof the yeast. So according to the package instructions, I'm adding 1/4 cup of warm water to the yeast and 1/4 of a teaspoon of sugar. And I'm just going to give that a little bit of a mix. I'll let that sit for about 5 or 10 minutes while the yeast proofs. So while the yeast is proofing, I'm going to prep some of the other ingredients. So typically pizza is made with all-purpose flour. To the extent possible, I like to switch the all-purpose flour for something healthier. I have made pizza with whole wheat flour completely, and that works just fine for my taste, but dough does taste different. So if you want, if you'd like a happy medium, I generally use 1.5 cups of whole wheat flour mixed together with 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, and to that I'm going to add half a teaspoon of salt. And to proof the yeast, we already added about 1/4 teaspoon of sugar, so I'm gonna add an additional 1 teaspoon of sugar, and I will mix that together. Now this is a basic pizza dough recipe that you can use for all sorts of different things, like different sorts of pizzas, with white sauce or marinara sauce, or pizza pockets, or even calzones. So now you can see that our yeast has proofed a little bit. It's gotten a little bit puffier, as you can see from before. So I'm gonna add my flour mixture into the yeast. I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of oil. You can use any oil that you have. Vegetable oil works just fine. I'm using a light olive oil. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use my hands, clean hands please, and mix everything together. Now at this point, the flour is a very crumbly mixture. I'm now gonna add 1 cup of warm water and knead that into a dough. Now if you use just all-purpose flour, you can reduce the water that you add now to 3/4 of a cup, because remember we used 1/4 of a cup of water to proof the yeast. So if you're just using all-purpose flour, you can add 3/4 of a cup of water at this point. If you like to give your dough a little bit of extra flavor, you can also add dried oregano leaves and dried basil leaves right into the flour mixture before you knead the dough. I sometimes do that. If you have a stand mixer, you can use the dough attachment to knead the dough, but this does not require a lot of elbow grease, so I don't want to bother taking out the mixer. So as you can see, our dough is pretty soft. So at this point, I'm just gonna shape it a little bit, and I'm just gonna use the same bowl here to let this dough rest. But before I do that, I just want to spray my bowl with cooking spray, and then put the dough on top and spray a little bit of cooking spray on the top. And all you're gonna do at this point is just cover the bowl with a plastic wrap and let this rest 4 to 6 hours, or until the dough doubles in size. What I like to do is make the dough in the morning to make the pizza maybe in the afternoon or evening. So now for the sauce, I have in a blender I have 5 medium-sized tomatoes. You can use about 5 or 6, and I'm just gonna blend this up quickly. So I've just pulsed the tomatoes for a few minutes. It's pureed quite nicely. So now in a heavy bottom pan, I'm gonna add about 1/2 tablespoon or less of olive oil. You can use vegetable oil if you want. I have the heat going at medium to medium high. So now when the oil is heated up a little bit, I'm gonna add just a pinch of asafoetida powder. You may know that as hing powder. This is completely optional. You can skip this if you don't like hing, or if you don't have hing at hand. And next, I'm gonna add the fresh tomato puree. This does begin to splatter a little bit, so make sure you have something to cover it handy. I'm already going to add just a little bit of dried oregano leaves. This is maybe about 1/4 of a tablespoon of dried oregano leaves. And then I'm also going to add about 1/4 of a tablespoon of dried basil leaves. Just a pinch of ground thyme. Now I'm just going to mix that slightly. And I'm not going to add salt or anything else at this point because I want to see how much this reduces to. So you just want to cover this up and let this simmer on medium to high heat. So we'll come back in a little bit. So it's been about 5 minutes and things are starting to simmer a little bit. So just give this a mix. You can actually just forget about this for a little bit if you have a heavy bottom pan. Just let the tomatoes cook and this will reduce, and then your tomato sauce will almost be ready. So the tomato sauce has been simmering on about 10 minutes. So at this point, and it's thickening a little bit, so at this point I'm just going to add about a teaspoon of sugar. Now if you feel like your tomato is cooked and it's just watery, then you can just, if it's not spluttering too much, then you can just leave the lid off and let this cook. Let the moisture evaporate. So for the basic tomato sauce, that's pretty much it, and then you'll add salt in the end, salt to taste. But I happen to have a little bit of grated Parmesan cheese at home, so I'm just going to also sprinkle just a little bit of the Parmesan cheese, maybe about 1.5 tablespoons, to give the sauce a richer flavor. If you don't have Parmesan cheese, you can completely skip this. So you want to let this cook until this reduces. You don't want this to reduce so that it's completely dry. You still want a little bit of moisture still. You want this to reduce to about pizza sauce consistency. So this also makes for a great pasta sauce. So this is a basic versatile tomato sauce for pizza or pasta. So our sauce has thickened quite a bit. There's still a little bit of moisture here, but a lot of it is gone. It's quite thick. So at this point, you can get a sense of how much salt to add. If you add it too early, sometimes the sauce gets very salty. At this point, so just add enough salt to taste and give that a stir. So you can see this is a saucy consistency, but there's still moisture left. I like to just turn the heat off at this point. If it's too runny, your pizza gets soggy. If it's too dry, then it doesn't taste very good. So now we get back to making the pizza. So it's been about 6 hours since we put this dough to rest, and it's more than doubled in size. Just give it a good knead one last time. Flour our work surface here. Now I'm just going to take about half of that dough. I'm just going to eyeball it here. Take about half of the dough and make it into a round ball. Put some flour on both sides. And I have a pizza stone here that I'm going to be using. I'm going to roll the dough about the size of the pizza stone. If you don't have a pizza stone, you can also just use a pizza pan, or if you don't have a pizza pan, just use a baking tray. The dough is nice and pliable. It's kind of soft. It's not a hard dough. When you roll the dough, just make the edges a little bit thicker than the middle parts. So I think I'm going to stretch it out to fit the size of my pizza stone here. So I'm going to take my pizza stone, and I'm just going to take just a little bit of cornmeal and spread it on the bottom. This is what gives the nice crunch in the bottom of the pizza that you get in the pizza store. If you don't have cornmeal, don't worry, you can do this step with the flour that you're using for the dough. This just gives a nice crunch to the pizza, but the main purpose of doing this is just so the dough doesn't stick to the stone. So I'm just gonna stretch this out a little bit, and then we're gonna top it off with a little bit of our tomato sauce. Now the first time I made this pizza a long time ago, I put a lot of sauce and it became like a runny pizza. So you don't need a whole lot, but if you like a lot of sauce, by all means use a lot of sauce. Next, I'm gonna sprinkle mozzarella cheese on top of the tomato sauce here. Use as little or as much cheese as you want. I like to put a thin layer of the mozzarella cheese and then put in my other toppings, and then just top it off with a little bit more mozzarella cheese. So that's what I'm gonna do here. So I'm gonna start with a handful of thinly sliced green pepper. You can use all sorts of different toppings, of course. So the world is your oyster, or should I say rather that the pizza dough is your oyster. Next, I'm going to use some Kalamata olives. I happen to have a huge jar from Costco, so I just cut the Kalamata olives into little rounds. I'm just going to spread that all over my pizza. I have my little helper here that is going to help me put some more cheese on top of the pizza. Good job. More cheese?
More cheese.
More cheese. Put some more cheese, please.
So this is how you sprinkle the cheese. You sprinkle a little bit in each spot and go through the spots. If there's a little bit too much, you can add a little bit to the other spots. And you should also concentrate on the pizza, not get distracted like I was. You can add as much cheese as you want, okay? We want a lot of cheese, so we're gonna add a lot.
So now this goes in the oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes. Okay, so this has just come out of the oven, and look at that wonderful color. The cheese and everything, it's quite hot. You want to cut the pizza right away.
There are 8 pieces in this pizza.
Look at that wonderful cheesy pizza.